Well, hello all. Welcome, Fire Engineering Nation. Welcome to Straight Talk, the first edition of a series that we'll meet a couple times a year to talk about us. Something that is becoming more and more often a topic of discussion. I got a co-host, Rob Fisher, who will introduce himself in a second. Another assistant, Father James Swarthout, and a couple of guests today. Every session that we're going to have, rather than just hear myself and Rob and Father Jim talk, we're going to have guests on special topics. Today is going to be Battalion Chief Adam Biddle and his wife Ann Biddle. And really the topic today is in regards to grief and loss, resilience, and how to get through it. We don't want to necessarily talk about the negative side of grief and loss. We really want to talk about, in regards to the fire service, how much we are exposed to, not only personally, but professionally, in our homes, in our lives, before we got in the fire service, after retirement, and what that effect is or has been, good, bad, and indifferent. One of the things that is probably the toughest thing that I have learned that people experience is of the loss of a family member. We've had injuries on the job, line of duty deaths, friends, and then obviously family members. But how many people have lost somebody that is younger than them or their child? We're going to learn firsthand from Chief Biddle and his wife Ann what they went through, how they managed to get through it, and where they're at now. I can't say enough in regards to their strength, their willingness to be vulnerable and open to share their story. And before I introduce them and tell you a little bit of backstory, I want to thank Fire Engineering. I want to thank Bobby Halton for allowing us to do this Humpday Hangout and now and in the future. So what I'd like to do is introduce Rob Fisher, my co-host.
Hey everyone, my name is Rob Fisher. Maybe you've seen my ugly face as part of Fools International. I run the blog talk show for our for Fools through Fire Engineering. I am the training trustee educational chair for Fools International, our organization, firefighters all across the world. Our relationship, I should say, with my relationship with Dan has been through the Fools, and Fools International is supporting causes like Rosecrans, and we've basically trying to take up the cause of taking care of our brothers and our sisters. And so that's kind of put me in touch with Dan. I've had the opportunity to meet Father Jim and many of the other staff members at Rosecrans through symposiums and at FDIC. I probably should just say, you know, I was fortunate as I was driving from, I was driving through Mississippi. I got a phone call from Dan saying, hey, we have this opportunity, and you know, would you be interested in co-hosting with me? And I'm thinking of calling the show Straight Talk, which was his keynote speech in FDIC. And you can't turn down the opportunity for something like that, and to hang out with good people and try to share and help others out. My story, real simply, is I've been in the fire service for 30 years. I can no longer count on my hands the number of friends that have taken their lives that have been associated with our job. And as most of you know that have been on the job, we see things that most people don't get to see. And many calls stick in my hard drive today from years ago. And so I had a really close friend a few years ago take his life. And from that point on, it was, I really need to do something more. I got involved with peer support, which then tied me in with Dan and everybody, and currently I'm the peer support coordinator for my department. I'm from Snohomish County in the state of Washington, not Washington D.C., but the one that it's much warmer than everybody else is. But so I'm looking forward to this show, our future shows, and you know, I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks, Rob. My other co-host is Father James Swarthout, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Father Jim Swarthout. I'm the director for clergy and alumni relations for Rosecrans, but I get to really align with the men and women on our Florian unit. My father was a fireman for many years, a volunteer fireman, and I really grew up in the firehouse. When I wanted to cut school, it seemed like I was always going to the firehouse and spending quite a bit of time with the men and women at the house. And so it was only natural for me in my work or ministry as a priest, as a clinician, as a therapist, to be able to align with men and women and first responders to try to heal the hole in the soul that we all have at one point or another through loss or grief, and so that we have an ability to find joy again. We all live with sort of that dark cloud, and I get to sort of walk with people in a very humble way, being with Rob and other people, and Dan, being at FDIC for the last 4 or 5 years, and being a part of the chaplain for the Fools International. It's a humble place for me to be able to walk with other men and women in uniformed service. You don't want me to go on. You really don't.
No, you kind of lost you there for a second. I understand. So thanks, Father Jim, for that introduction. And for all those people out there that are listening down the road, it'll basically be myself, Rob Fisher, Father Jim, and then hopefully guests, because I know for myself, and I kid about it, but it's true, I can't listen to myself for 10 minutes talking, let alone you guys listen to me and Rob and Father Jim for an hour. So the goal is really to connect everybody, bring people together in our common issues, struggles, successes. I couldn't be happier to have Chief Biddle and his wife Ann on today. I know it took a lot for them to, so let me tell you a little bit of the story is that, and I'll let Adam kind of share kind of how we met. We met actually before we actually met. He met me before I met him. I was actually asked by Tony Murray to do a peer support training in Hamilton County. It was a 2-day training. Father Jim and I put it on and facilitated it. And I think it was the second day that I was there. And he came up to me and he goes, "You work for Chicago?" And I can't remember how I introduced myself, because I get bored when I introduce myself, because I'm like, I'm not really that interesting. So I'm like, "Yeah, I work for Chicago." And he goes, "Did you take a picture?" And I'm like, "Oh, crap. What picture did he see of me? And where is that at?" But we got to talk, and he's like, "Did you take a picture in front of the firehouse with your kids?" And I'm like, I'm thinking back about 15 years. I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "You're the reason I'm in the fire service." And I'm like, "Oh boy, so is this good or bad?" And he had a smile on his face, and he said, "No, I've had a hell of a career." And basically the story that I shared, gosh, what was it, 15 years ago, helped him share with his dad that that's what he wanted to do in life. So my point in bringing that up is that when Bobby Halton has asked me to talk and share, many people don't know this, but for the keynote, I told him no twice. But I think you realize you don't tell Bobby Halton no. He wasn't asking me, he was really telling me. And I'm like, I don't think that people are ready for, behavioral health at the big stage. And he goes, "No, they are." So I've taken his advice, I've taken his direction. I've learned from incidences of talking with Adam and many other people that I've heard from later on in months and years that we have to be connected, and that's what we're doing here with Straight Talk and really talking straight. So I don't know where this reaches you right now or when you're going to watch this. I know for me it's -20 and the wind chill is -47 in Chicago. I did look. It's not about who's the biggest, toughest, and strongest. I know North Dakota right now is minus 35 or 38. So you got me, and I don't want that. So push that up towards Canada. Sorry about that, you guys, you Canadians. But let me give Adam an opportunity here to kind of join this conversation and tell us a little bit about yourself, Adam, and then we'll meet your wife.
Well, sure. Hi. Yeah. Adam Biddle, Noblesville Fire Department, just north of Indianapolis, 7-station department, just typical suburban Midwestern city department, work with great people. And that, really goes into a lot of kind of the backstory of hopefully what we'll get into that like you talked about, the connection. Our story's pretty, I guess, normal. We had just a normal family, and then unfortunately lost a son about 8.5 years ago to a disease that it's not very common. We didn't know anything about it. We are still learning about it, but we know it wasn't anything that we did. The fortunate part for us was we had him for a month, which is really rare with the disease that he had. And, and then just, kind of the recovery from that was about connection. It was about finally being able to, I think, like Father Jim mentioned, be vulnerable and, kind of work through that grief together and as individuals to kind of process it all. And what's been really, I think, good for me, just as I've been in leadership positions, that not only how you are vulnerable with yourself, with each other, but you make those connections with your people, and that's what builds trust, and that's what can elevate your crew and your team to be better than they normally could be, is that trust and connection with each other. And it's amazing how all of it's been interconnected. Just the more you share, the more people share with you. And just in response, like to the article that Chief DeGryse had me write for fire rescue, the connection that I got from so many people that reached out afterwards was just, I certainly wasn't prepared for it. And it was very humbling, but it was really neat to see that it did break down some walls in people, and to be able to talk about, struggles, problems. And I think for me, the biggest thing has been really understanding grief. I think it's really almost misunderstood. I think most people, and myself included, before we lost Heath, grief to me was just an intense emotion, but it's not. It's a process. It's an action. There's mechanics to it. You have to go through it. And I think for us, we went to a retreat for couples that had lost a child, and the host, she's authored several books on grief, and something that she brought up that has kind of stuck with me was, you can grieve many things, not just death. And I think when I went to the symposium you spoke at in Indianapolis back in November, the other gentleman that spoke really dialed into retiree suicide, firefighter retiree suicide right now. And I can't help but think that just was unprocessed grief of, I'm no longer a firefighter, I'm a retired firefighter. And how we are, we identify with our job. It is who we are. And it almost seems like there's a grieving process that needs to happen, when that person makes the transition from firefighter to retired firefighter. And that's just one little thing. And again, Dan is you're the expert on the clinical side of it. Father Jim, I'll defer to you on the spiritual side of that, but that's just in my very, layman's terms, and in my mind, that kind of resonated with me when she said that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Adam. One thing that I've learned is that give people an opportunity to share their story. And I think just many people that may not have read your story about Heath, after getting to know you a little bit and then you sharing that with me, I'm like, man, that is so powerful in regards to what you and Ann have been through. And I think people would benefit from that. And for those of you that didn't read his article, search it on by his name, Adam Biddle, Battalion Chief Adam Biddle, and it's very powerful. But that was the impetus for me and Rob and Father Jim to talk about who we wanted on here first. Your ability to be vulnerable and to share your grief and loss, and then the success is very important for others. In this, we don't unfortunately have the time to talk about the number of people that reached out to you that said, hey, thank you. And that's not what you were looking for. You were, like now, probably very concerned about what you're going to say, how you're going to feel, and how you're going to represent your emotions. But there's so many people out there that want to connect, and this is a great venue. So thank you for starting that off.
Sure.
I'd like to introduce, give Ann an opportunity to introduce herself. So Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you. We've been married for 18 years. We've got, 3 kids, 13, 11, and 7. I'm a part-time physician assistant, family practice. Keep very busy carting people to and from swim practice.
So tell me a little bit about yourselves. Where did you guys meet and when?
We met at Ball State University, sophomore year, my freshman year. Yeah. His friends lived below me in the dorms, and I was always the 5th person to go play basketball with them.
And how did that work out? Did you school him a little bit?
He usually lost.
but I won in the end.
Yeah. Much like me and my wife, she was my boss at one point, and she fired me. Honest to God truth. If she's out there and watching, maybe she did fire me. That was not because she didn't like me or I wasn't doing a good job. It actually came from above, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But I got her back because I married her. So, so how long have you guys been married?
18 years.
Oh, you said that, right? Okay. And so tell me, in regards to this connection, what drew each of you together?
Well, other than the flannel shirts and basketball shorts, probably a sense of humor, and just he's a lot of fun to be around.
And I when I first met Ann, I just assumed I didn't have a chance. So
didn't matter.
Yeah.
Never looked like that.
Very cool. Very cool. So the topic of your son, Heath, you have, in my opinion, 4 children, 3 that are with us and 1 that has moved on, but at some point you'll be with again. Tell us the 3 children that you have with you that are in your home right now, because you're home from school. And then share with us a little bit about Aiden's your oldest, Heath's condition.
So we have Aiden is in 8th grade. He's a swimmer. Elise is 11, and she's just started swimming, and she loves to make anything that she or that we will let her. Zach is 7, and he's the wild man. Also another swimmer. Got to burn some of that energy off. Heath had a condition called alveolar capillary dysplasia, which basically means just that the oxygen transfer at the smallest level of the lungs just didn't take place properly. It typically presents right after birth, but he was just a later case. So, we were obviously very blindsided, and, especially being in medicine, it was something I'd never even heard of. So it was that rare. And how many things are there truly no treatment for? So, we had about a week-long stay in the hospital before, we came to realize that there was absolutely nothing that they could do. So.
And I think that played into it a little bit, was just, kind of the blindsided. It certainly wasn't instant. I mean, there's obviously instances of, immediate, like a trauma or something like that. But, we were fine. We were happy, 3 kids. And then all of a sudden this just, the bomb dropped on us. And I think that probably played into my struggles right after. I think, like I referenced in the article, just, as soon as it happened, I kind of went into this just like, okay, what's the next job I need to do? What, I've got to make sure that she's okay, that the kids are okay. And looking back, probably neglected myself, but I didn't realize I was doing it. I didn't realize that.
Well, you mentioned, excuse me for interrupting, Adam, but you mentioned in the word soldiering on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You referenced that. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. That was just, it was a bad situation. Life's not fair. That's just, that's part of living. We were trying to move on. I was, trying to be strong for her, for our family. Obviously still working, my responsibilities there. And, I think just by doing that, probably, just not being aware of this process that I was supposed to go through. It was 8 years ago, and I appreciate that Chief Halton, was very emphatic with him wanting you to present, because I think it is important that it is front and center. I've seen it in my department since that, when we do have bad runs, guys aren't afraid to talk about, man, that really stunk. I hated that I had to see that. And so I think, 8.5 years ago, it was still just not that kind of stuff, at least in our job, wasn't being talked about. And I think in a little bit of right after, I think the soldiering on was good. I think, and we've talked about the fact that we had 2 other little kids that, we had to get out of bed. They needed breakfast. And there were days we sure didn't want to. But in that regard, that part of soldiering on, I think, was good, that it forced us to continue to live life and to continue to push through, even though we were hurting. So, I guess it was a, good and bad. From not seeking help, that would be the bad part. But, from the good part is we did see that, hey, we can survive this. We can keep moving.
Yeah. Adam.
Yeah.
That is so. You and Ann both have professions that kind of parallel with how we deal with things, and so I'm just curious. You're able to go to work, and there's elements at the fire station, obviously, where we do kind of huddle around each other. But maybe for Ann, was it you guys were doing different type of seeking different type of help from people at work? I mean, they're the same, but they're different. Did you guys have your own groups that you were working with to try to get through some of this?
I mean, not formally. Honestly, I had a coworker who had lost a son in a riptide accident. And so she'd gone through it, probably 5 years before. So she was a huge help, just talking with other coworkers, on how to act, because, the tendency is to just kind of avoid talking to people, because they're uncomfortable, because it's the worst thing you can think of. So she was a huge help, just, for me to know what to expect on how people would respond to me, and also just to have somebody there to talk to.
Did she reach out to you, or did you reach out to her?
She reached out to me. She actually did while we were still in the hospital. So it was kind of, from the initial.
I'm curious, Ann, did you receive any type of grief counseling through your education, becoming a PA? Because one thing is, I know, like for us as firefighters, you know, you learn the task part of the job. We don't worry about the behavioral side, you know, a lot of the troubles that we are dealt with. And I would hope that doctors, or in your case as a PA, that you guys get some type of grief counseling or learn to deal with it.
No, there really was nothing formal.
I would affirm that in terms of education with doctors and nurses. I think it's experience precedes the actual education.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find that as sad, but I think as you use the word soldiering on, I think what has happened over a period of time, what I learned either in the priesthood or in ministry, it's really about the fellowship. And in recovery, what we really do is we soldier on, I think, shoulder to shoulder in many ways. We can't do it by ourselves anymore. And when we find out within the firehouse that we work together as a group of people, and that we all have gifts and skills, the engineer, the firefighter, the paramedic, the chief, we all do it together. And I think the same thing with sort of loss and grief. We all experience loss and grief. I buried a fire chief the other day. If I may be, last Saturday, I saw my newest niece and held her hand, and I walked with a fire chief from Lake Forest who passed away over many years of age, and I walked with his wife to the graveside. And it was holding her hand with her family that I really felt a great sense of being heart to heart. In Latin word, maybe cor ad cor, heart to heart. We work and walk together. Soldiering on, maybe individually, but I think shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, we really in the fellowship find relief. We find our commonalities. Anne, you mentioned something, somebody came to you and said, I heard that you had lost somebody, and then all of a sudden there was a commonality. And I think when we find our commonalities, we become vulnerable, open to each other, and then we walk with each other. I'm just an old priest.
So, Adam and Ann, it appears that both of you seem to have soldiered on, and I'm going to assume independently and together. Yeah. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm just thinking about the things that have gone through my life in 25 years of marriage and 4 kids. And right now I have 2 parents in hospice. We lost my wife's mom to cancer. Nobody knows this, but basically my dad went into the hospital, and we were just told that he's got 3 weeks to 3 months to live. What was the communication between you two those first months? Good, bad, and indifferent.
I really all good. I mean, obviously we're devastated, but we'd gone through it together. That's I don't recall. I mean, being honest, I don't recall any arguments. I think we were so focused on making sure that the kids were okay, and I was very focused on making sure that she was okay. I think we just kind of took one step at a time. She was still off work, from being on maternity anyway, and so we had some time off. I was given, from, again, a fantastic department that I worked for. Our chief at the time, he said, I hope I don't need to tell you this, but you take as much time as you need. And so, we just kind of rallied around each other. And, I do think that, I was so concerned about listening to her that I probably didn't feel like I needed to talk. She was very, being very expressive about, what she was going through. But I do remember I read Coach Tony Dungy's book, and he talked about when they lost their son, that they each had periods where one of them was the strong one when the other one needed it, and that it wasn't planned, but it just, it kind of happened. And, as we've talked, I don't believe in coincidence. again, Father Jim could probably speak to that stuff better than I can. But and we noticed that. I mean, there were days. I specifically I remember like the 1 year anniversary of the day he was born was really, really hard for Ann, and the 1 year anniversary of him dying was really, really hard for me. And we were kind of able to support each other through that.
Ann, would you like to share your thoughts?
I mean, I think when there's, illness or injury or, any loss like that, there's so many times that there can be, blame. And I think one thing with Heath was there was no blame. There was nothing, that anybody could have done. We later found out it was a genetic mutation. So I think that part of it, kept us, we were always on each other's side. There was just never any negative feelings, towards each other.
In a faith perspective, if I could, a Judeo-Christian experience, Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and he used the words ruah, hua, actually R-U-A-H, which means breath. I think that we often, as firefighters, first responders, we help each other breathe. We walk shoulder to shoulder, and if you couldn't breathe for a while because of the causative shock or trauma, somebody else will help breathe with you. And I think that it's all relational. So we see our strengths and our gifts. Some have certain strengths and others have certain gifts. We work those together. I think that peer-to-peer piece that's so important.
Oh, for sure. And that's definitely what we felt with each other. Again, Coach Dungy kind of worded it a lot better than I can, but that's exactly what we felt with each other. And then she mentioned the support that she had from friends at work. I absolutely had the same thing. And obviously our family, extended family, we felt that for each other. And I empathize with those that don't have that, that, either in their department, they don't have the peer support model, or, for whatever reason, there's not that closeness. People that, don't have family close geographically. I can't imagine going through something like what we did without that support network.
Hey, Adam and Ann, so I know Ann mentioned that she had a coworker that kind of reached out to her, had a similar experience, but did you guys reach out to help outside of each other? And if so, what did that look like, and was it a benefit to you?
Excellent.
Yeah, I think kind of multifaceted. Initially we met with our pastor at church, obviously for arrangements and things like that. And then that continued for a couple other sessions. And then trying to think, it was about 6 months later, where I started struggling a lot. I didn't realize that's, I was just real irritable, and I didn't realize kind of what was going on. And finally, we've got a EAP, Employee Assistance Program, through work. And I reached out to that, and, it was a tough call to make, I'll admit. I felt like I was weak, that I ought to be able to handle this. And once I got through that first session, my whole perspective changed. And then that, coupled with, I think we mentioned earlier, we went to a faith-based retreat for parents that have lost a child. And that was immensely helpful. That was about 3 years after he passed away. So we were to the point where we could talk about it a little easier than what we could right away. And I think, looking back, that was a huge leap in our journey. And I've had to go back a couple of times, just, little flare-ups here and there, flood of memories and emotions and things like that. But I think you've had, you didn't really have anything else.
I didn't do anything formal. I mean,
well, you mentioned, so So Adam, you did something through EAP, and then Ann just had a relationship with a coworker that had a similar experience. Do you think, though, looking back, that maybe the experience together, even though it was 3 years later that you guys did something together, would that have been more beneficial? Kind of goes back to what Father Jim's saying about going shoulder to shoulder. And do you think that an experience together would have been more beneficial, or do you see that maybe individually, addressing individually and allowing you to work individually and then getting together was more beneficial?
Gosh, I don't know. That's a great question, and I think it's an awesome topic to dig a little deeper in. For us, it worked. I don't know that. I mean, I'll let you answer. I don't know that the group thing right away would have been manageable. It
was tough.
It was tough anyway.
3 years in, yeah.
And there were a few couples there that it was very recent that they had lost, within just a few months of the loss of their child, that they were there. And, and we empathized. We remembered those days, and it was really tough for them. And not that it wasn't tough for us, but we had, the healing process was well down the road. So I don't know. That's I suppose it would depend on the individual. Some people are comfortable talking in groups and need that, I guess, purge, for lack of a better word. But, some people are more private, being able to get those emotions out on a one-on-one with a professional or with a close friend might be better. For us, I think it probably worked out better the way it went for us, kind of to address the individual and then kind of, work into a group. And then, many years down the road, be able to do something like this. And in fact, we just shared a little bit in our Sunday school class this past Sunday, going through a book on vulnerability, ironically enough, again, with the coincidences, Father Jim.
I would say there's a scripture piece that says there's a time for everything, and in Ecclesiastes, and it's basically that too. But I think things like our Humpday Hangout like this, having conversations, those conversations that may have been put off to the side, we know when we can be open and honest now, and that we can find places of opportunity where it was always put under a rock. I remember my father, who was sharing with a traumatic event with me a few years ago, that when he was a firefighter and dealing with the death with somebody who had smoke inhalation, a kid that did not survive. And I asked Dad, how come you never told me this? He said, I didn't want to bother you. Why would I bother you with that pain? I think, and then all of a sudden he opened up from an experience 30 years ago. I think the opportunity to be able to talk, be vulnerable, and that we can walk with each other at moments like this, at vulnerability and hurt and pain, is the greatest gift we can offer each other. But there is a time for the ability to, I guess, ability to be open, and that there are opportunities. But it is scary stuff, but it's wonderful. You have a right to walk through, people have a right to have joy back in their lives. And I would ask you, how are the kids? Do the kids ever talk about that situation too? Because it seems to be, I think that because you're a family, and a firehouse is a family. How do you do that as a family, if I may ask?
Yeah, I mean, they were, what, three and almost 5.
Yeah.
Happened, so they were tiny. But yeah, I mean, they talked about it a lot
early
on, and I mean, we still do. Initially, obviously, it was very painful, and now, they talk about looking forward to seeing him. I mean, it's just normal to them. I feel like kids accept things so much easier, than adults. And they've got that childlike faith.
I would say you're wounded healers. So in your hurts and your pain, much of us in our hurts and our pain, when we're able to be open and honest with it, we become the authentic wounded in our pain, but we become healers for others. That's moments like this that we get to do this. Thank you.
I got to say for myself, Adam and Ann, and Rob. Rob, you have 4 or 5 children? I'm trying to remember.
I have one kid and a granddaughter.
All right, so Rob, just go with me, okay? All right? Can't remember everything. I'm thinking of Father Jim. We're all his kids, right?
50 nieces and nephews. 50 nieces and nephews.
Right.
Yes.
So, with ourselves, my wife and I, we have 4. We try to treat them all the same. We try to have them all on our mind equally. We try to give them, and to exhaustion, we give them everything equal for Christmas and for birthdays, which is exhausting. But in regard to like my thoughts in life and work and relationships, and obviously we're talking about Heath and what you went through with Heath, but it's family. It's not just soldiering on, but it's moving on, but taking with. Everybody needs a little bit more support at different times, just like anything in life. And so my question to both of you, and when does his thought come to your mind, and what do you do with that?
Well, for me, and this was something that we had talked about. I took a job mowing the cemetery where he's buried, and so through the summers, I'm able to go down there and take care of the cemetery. It's kind of just that primal need that I'm a guy, I need to do something, and it has really helped me. So certainly then, but yeah, I think passing moments throughout almost every day. I feel comfortable, and it's not an exaggeration to say at some point every single day I think about him, just like I do the other 3 kids. And that's been kind of one of the struggles with losing a child is, you love your kids. At work you want to talk about your kids, and you share stories of your kids with your coworkers, and there's this social stigma that we can talk about 3 of them, but there's this one that we can't talk about, and that's tough, but we get it. It's, you automatically would put yourself into that position of what it would be like to lose a child, and it's a horrible thing to think about. And so it's not, we understand it, but it is, it's something that we kind of have to internalize a little bit, just maybe share with each other or with a family. Obviously our youngest son, Zach, he was born after we lost Heath, and so he never knew him. So he'll occasionally ask questions, and we'll work through it with him. Obviously a little confusing for a 7-year-old mind, but no, I think for us, at least with each other, to be able to talk about him, and then between the article and getting ready to do this, the subject at work has come up, and I have been able to talk a little bit more about it. It was a comfortable introduction to the subject, I guess. And you find once somebody asks one question and they see that we're okay with answering it, it's one more question, just because it is a topic that fortunately most people don't have any experience with, and there is, especially with friends that care, that want to ask but don't want to upset us. It's like, we've already been upset. Nothing you're going to say is going to be worse than what we've already experienced. So there's no, just like doing this, it's what we experienced, that this is nothing. Being able to talk about it is actually a little bit of a release, I think, for both of us to be able to talk about him and it be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think about him every day. I mean, the depth of it obviously varies. There's not really any specific reminder, I guess. I mean, we have photos up in the house and everything. But yeah, he's always there. I think one of the hardest things for me is just, we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but when people ask how many kids you have, You know, it's, how do you answer that? You want to say 4, but you can't always go that in depth with people that you barely know.
Yeah, no, that's one thing I've learned, and that's why I asked you. I think people certainly don't want to offend somebody. And for me, I've learned from people that have lost children that they include the one that is no longer here on earth. You guys were talking about interactions with other people, relationships with yourself, with your significant other, with your children, with your parents. I mean, it could be exhausting. How does somebody manage through that? I could tell you that, unfortunately, our department has experienced a significant amount of loss from line of duty deaths. We've had 1 a year since I've been on, since 1989, and we've had a minimum, unfortunately, of 2, if not 3 suicides every year. I remember talking to people that have lost their spouse, and 10 years ago, when we really weren't talking about suicide, I'm like, well, how do I start this conversation with somebody? What do I do? I remember talking to somebody that I knew for 30 years, and it was, I was trying to understand how somebody gets to that point. And I remember I said, how would you, what's your greatest difficulty each day? And the response was that people don't treat me the way they did before my spouse passed away. I'm like, can you explain that? And they said, well, when I'm walking down the hallway and somebody else is walking, they'll either put their head down or walk into a room. And I'm like, so that was very troubling for somebody. And I learned, I'm like, boy, just like when we've learned in peer support, is that don't ask somebody if they're going to hurt themselves. Ask them the direct question. And that's why we have the topic of straight talk. Be straight with somebody. We learn in the fire service to be direct. Because if we don't, we don't assess the situation well, whether it be a medical run or doing our 360 size up for a fire, we'll miss something. So you've been through this process now, and it's been 8 years, right? Or coming up on 9 years. It still continues to be a process, the grieving process. If you could tell somebody that has experienced this, will experience it, or will encounter somebody that's experienced it, what would you share with them?
Well, when you were just talking about that, I was reminded of a conversation I had with Tony Murray, our friend, that's our union president. He called me before I came back to work and just asked, hey, what do you need? What can we do for you? And the thought just popped into my mind. Just please tell everybody not to treat us different. And it was ironic that you brought that up. I was really concerned about that. Like I didn't want to, I guess, have to face that, because that seemed harder than just talking about it, than being okay. Like that all of a sudden I had this condition that nobody wanted to address. And we're still who we are. That didn't change. So I would say don't be afraid of the person. Anybody listening, I just think just in the 20 years I've been on my, small suburban department, the number of things that we've had happen to guys, work related, non-work related, family, really tough situations. And, that's the last thing they need, is to be avoided. Because you feel like you're going to say the wrong thing. Sometimes saying nothing is worse than saying the wrong thing, because even when you say the wrong thing, you at least show that you care. So is that?
Yeah. And I mean, just thinking of, dealing with somebody that's going through it. I mean, don't say, let me know if you need anything, because they'll never ask. You go to them, you assert yourself, you just be there.
So we have a couple. I have a couple more questions, and I want to do a final thought. Before we go there, I just want to point out something that probably a lot of people are wondering is going on here, and that's the overseer for Father Jim. Father Jim, you want to?
Yes, I've been known to have somebody look over my shoulder often, and I don't know if you could see that. Let's see. Can you get that better up there, Danny? Is that there? It is. See over there. It is. There it up there. Can you see it there a little better? That's Danny. So it's all. I get the ability to work with Dan, and it's always humble to do that.
That's like Danny 20 years ago, though.
I know. Yeah, I had to have that Photoshop to make it look the way it does now.
Oh boy. So Adam and Ann, describe the state of your family right now, if you can.
Busy, for sure. Just, she's the quintessential firefighter wife that is a single parent a third of the time, and a job that I don't know that I could handle at all, let alone as well as she does. Managing 3 kids a third of the time by herself, but no, we're good. Not perfect, but we are good. I think what we experienced has certainly gave us a little bit of a different perspective on life and kids and what's important, and just really experiencing the joy of seeing them accomplish things and do things. I think we appreciate it probably a little bit more than what we did before, just from that. But I think as like being able to do this, we are to the point where it feels good to be able to do things like this, that we can talk about it. 5 years ago, I don't know that I'd have been able to come on, that we would have been able to come on and do this, but just that healing process, that does take time, and sometimes there is no substitute just for time. And that's, I think, one of the things that we knew we were facing, and we just did truly soldier on through that part of it and get to where we are today.
So kind of 2 questions in one, kind of final question. Hopefully you're okay with the questions, and you're not exhausted with us yet. Kind of your final thoughts to the viewers and listeners that are there. And would you have, looking back on your experience, would you have done anything differently?
Sure.
I'm not a big, I don't have a lot of regret. I try not to have regret, because, I think where we're at right now, I wouldn't want anything to change that. So, that's maybe a little more philosophical of an answer than you wanted, but me personally, I probably would have sought more professional help, just automatically made myself go to some sort of counseling right afterwards. Again, the climate of our job is so much different now than what it was even 8 years ago. That would be probably the only thing I would have done differently. And I guess a final thought, maybe a couple things, just, knowing that everybody that is listening to this, is in a department, this job's about people, plain and simple. And lives are messy. People are messy. And I say that with love. We all are. It's not perfect. So people are going to have bad things, and especially chief officers, fire officers. You've got that sacred duty to help your people so that they can help who we're sworn to protect, and to make sure that they're okay, and to, like you said, Chief, to not be a void, but to be direct, and to make sure people are doing okay. And I think the the topic of grief, and again, looking at it more than just with death. You know, you can grieve a marriage, you can grieve the loss of a job, you can grieve retirement. It's a process, and I think to understand that and to know that the guys that are on your shift are going to be going through those things, and to kind of know where to point them in the right direction, and to not make it a taboo subject if they are going through it, or when they come back from it, to, you know, like we talked a minute ago, not avoiding it. And that, you know, that just comes through those relationships that you build and the trust that you build with your crews. And just, you know, real quick, if you don't mind, really appreciate this opportunity. You know, I kind of laughed when you were talking about how Chief Halton, you know, asked you multiple times and you don't say no. That was a little bit of the conversation I think you and I had when you asked me to do this, but you know, it certainly was not a I didn't have to think twice. I was honored that you asked, and very humbled that you asked us to help with this. So thank you.
You're a gift to many. Thank you for your gifts.
Ann?
I don't have anything that profound, I don't think. I mean, I don't think I would do anything different. I mean, maybe I would try and get some counseling, formal counseling myself, but you know, I had a lot of good connections, so I feel like I think I got what I needed. But no, I don't think I would change anything.
Yeah, I think you guys kind of explained in the beginning is that, and we know this from training, and that's one of the reasons why I have Rob here in regards to Fools International. How I got involved with Fools, it's all about training and education, is that you have a foundation of a friendship, which has been able to keep you guys together. You know, I always said, and I said in my keynote, my wife loves me, but she didn't always like me. And I'm assuming that is common amongst a lot of relationships, marriage or friendships. I can't say enough in regards to your willingness to come on this show and share your personal story. I didn't ask you this before. I don't know if you have this now, and if you don't, I get it. Do you have so two things. One, do you have a family picture?
Oh.
And two, I know Adam's smart and good, but I know those certificates in the back are not all his.
You get a couple of them.
Yeah, the little ones off to the side are mine.
Great. That's great.
Quick
And the only one I have is behind my shoulder.
I'm trying to get one without the.
Oh, the kids, yeah.
Fortunately, the kids inherited their looks from their mother, so they were blessed in that regard.
Dominant genes, of course, right?
That's great.
Fast here. Well, you're getting the phone shot here.
That's great. Oh yeah.
Oh, you can't talk.
Do we lose it? We had it. There you go. Can we get it? There we go. 159.
So Jim, Father Jim, you haven't realized that when you talk that I know you want to be on screen, but every time you talk, it pulls away from them. So
I get it.
Like when we talk about the homilies, zip it. Can we see that picture one more time?
Sorry, I don't have a.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing. Before I kind of sign off, Rob, Father Jim.
Pleasure, honor.
I would just say, first of all, thanks, Adam and Ann, for coming on the show and sharing experience. Just, you know, echo what Dan had said. I know it's not always easy, but I think that it is part of recovery. I know we're 9 years in, and this is part of the whole process. I would say that what we talked about is not everybody grieves the same way. Not everybody needs to go through the process the same way. Those that are out listening, some of you might want to go on a personal touch. Some might want to do it as a group. In the fire service, we do certain things that are as a group debriefings or critical incident stress management versus taking care of things on a personal level. So I think there has been a change in the American fire service in the last few decades that have changed our dynamics of being in the firehouse and how we do things. And I think we struggle as a group of firefighters, men and women, to be more personal. And sometimes, we need to work through this. This is kind of an evolution of more diversity in a world, but we need to take the time to reach out to our brother and our sister when we see that something's going on and ask them, how are you doing? And I learned that from Dan.
Yep.
And I think it's very important, and it's an easy step to start a conversation. And as Ann had said, when you say, "Can I do anything for you?" When you say those words, you better be backing that up, and likely they're going to tell you no. But to start the conversation, you can at least ask them how they're doing, and I think. And part of this conversation, the one thing is, and I cannot agree more with this, is that when your brother or sister or a family member is struggling through something like that, treating them normal is probably one of the best things that you can do. Being available to them, reaching out to them, and just not trying to add more drama to something that already has a lot of emotion wrapped in it. And I cannot agree more with their expression there. And lastly, for the chiefs and for the training officers that are watching this, here you have two professions, medical profession and a firefighter, and both of them that see a lot of death and destruction. And here we do not provide the proper training to prepare our people for that type of environment. And I think if there's one thing before I leave my profession, is I'm hoping that we change that and we put more emphasis on the behavioral health side of our profession to help us get through that. So lastly, just thanks Ann and Adam for your time today, and I enjoyed being a part of your story.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, to my guests, Adam and Ann, thank you. To Rob and Father Jim, I'll see you in May. Well, our next Humpday Hangout will be the 5th Wednesday of May. Thank you to Fire Engineering Nation. For those of you that sat here with us and joined our conversation, those of you that now or later that watch the archive have any thoughts or want to have a discussion about something at our next one, shoot me an email or shoot Fire Engineering an email and he'll get it to me. If you got any questions for us or you want to contact Adam, I'm assuming, Adam, you would be open to...
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Ann as well, right? We won't put you're busier than a one-arm paper hanger. Adam's just a battalion chief, and so if somebody reaches out to me, we're okay with sharing your email. Okay, great. So a couple overall themes, in a sense. I think we all said grieving is a process. It has a beginning. We don't know necessarily where that end is. There's 5 stages, and they could be intertwined. We didn't necessarily talk about all of them, and I won't get into it. But a couple of things that you shared with me that is important to touch on is trust and connection. Trust yourself and have the ability to connect with somebody else and someone else, whether it be from peer support, family member, or professional. We can do it alone, but we can maybe do it a little bit better with a little bit of help. And those people that are going through difficulty, as Rob and Ann have said, and as friends of mine have said, treat them the same. Please treat them the same. They want to be treated as normal. Whether or not it's, the reality is it's, you have a new normal each day based on your experience, treat them the same. And then also reach out. My sign off is be safe and be intentional. Some things do happen on accident, and there is a road that I think God or somebody out there has for us. But by being intentional, you'll be able to achieve what you want. So thanks for joining us.